I'm going to talk to my guest today. Is a local teacher and member of National Union of Teachers, Paul Magar. Welcome to the show, Paul.
Thank you, Oliur.
We're going to start off, first of all, about we know there is a state schools and there is academies and free schools. Lots of people are for and against when it comes to academies, schools, and free school. What is the difference between those two? As far as I'm concerned, both of them provide education to the young people. So why are people so against academies and free schools?
Well, the first thing to understand is that once a child is in a school, I mean, I'm also an officer in the National Union of Teachers. We have members in state schools, in academies, and in free schools, and we are committed as teachers and as trade unionists to, in every school, regardless of what status the school has, to making sure that children receive high quality education, good teaching, and the best possible chance in their future lives, exam success, and everything like that. So that should be taken as read. Our opposition to academies and free schools is about the structure and the governance of those schools. So, for example, if you look at Tower Hamlets, where we live and work, it has a fantastic education system because you've had parents, governors, the local authority, teachers, a whole number of people have worked together collaboratively and cooperatively under the umbrella of the local authority over many years, and it's one of the most improved boroughs in the country. The results are fantastic in Tower Hamlets by any measure or any yardstick. If you compare them to anywhere else, not just in Britain but anywhere else in the world, it's something we should be very, very proud of. But what's an important element of that is that the admissions policies for those schools are something that's under democratic control. There's has been a borough-wide admissions policy that the schools reflect the community from which they come. It's also been the case that the governance of those schools has democratic control. Well, the local authority has an input into the governance of the school I work in, which is a state school in Tower Hamlets. Parents have the right to elect governors. The local community has governors. Staff have governors. So the running of the school reflects all the different stakeholders in the
But
local area.
a lot of the academies and free schools will say they also have same sort of structure in place.
That's not entirely true, because the problem with an academy is every academy is firstly its own admissions authority. It can choose sometimes to go along with the policies in the borough, but it doesn't have to. As soon as you become an academy, you then become your own admissions authority. You have the right to pick and choose who comes into that school. So that's the first thing. An academy, state schools have to broadly follow the national curriculum. Now, there are issues as a teacher, I think, with the detail of the national curriculum.
Wouldn't the academies would
No,
also have to follow the national curriculum?
No, academies do not have to follow the national curriculum. So some may choose to, but they don't have to. They can follow whatever curriculum they want. Now, I think that's wrong. It's a two-tier education system. There are problems with the national curriculum, but the idea that there should be a broad curriculum, which the expectation of parents is when you send your child to a school, there's a broad and balanced curriculum which their schools are required to follow. But why should academies be exempt from that? If it's good enough for everybody else, it should be good enough for them. And there's no democratic governance whatever. Take the big chains, the academy chains, the Harris academies. Who decides what happens in those? It's Lord Harris, a carpet manufacturer. It's run as a business essentially. The Arc Academy, all of these big chains, Oasis, they're essentially private businesses. At the moment, they can't run schools for profit because that's illegal in Britain, in the public schools, not in the schools. But it's very clear, I think, from the Education Secretary, Nicky Morgan, and some of the things that happen in America, in the long run, they would like to see academies becoming where they run schools for profit as a business.
But what would you say to parents who struggle to get their children into state schools because there is not enough school places?
Absolutely.
When you speak to supporters of academies and free schools, they would often say, we're providing school places where local authorities or states are failing to do so.
That's true, and any parent, of course, they want their child to go to a school and a good school, and we have teachers will work, and many of our members work in academies. The problem is, why is that situation arisen? It's not that local authorities are failing to provide places for schools, it's because the government is preventing local authorities from building and opening schools. We know in this borough, the LEA had a plan, for example, because there's a shortage of school places in this borough. In primary, it has been over recent years, and now that population bulge is about to hit secondary school, so there's going to be a shortage of secondary places in the borough. And I'm using Tower Hamlets as an example, but it goes much wider than that. Local authorities are not allowed to open new schools. In Tower Hamlets, there was a plan on the old West Ferry Printers site to develop a new school there, but the government will only allow that to happen if it's an academy. So it's government policy that prevents new schools and the school places being provided, and they will only allow that shortage to be met by academies and free schools. If they would allow local authorities to open schools, you could plan places to meet where the need is. The problem at the moment is the government is allowing free schools to open, academies to open, in places where there isn't a shortage of places, and that's not happening in places where it's
And
needed.
if you compare the results between the state schools and academies, would you say the state schools does much better than academies or free schools?
The government claim is twofold on academies. One, that their results are better. There's no evidence of that.
So why would the government say
There's
that,
not
though?
much evidence that they worse, but there's no big evidence one way. There was a whole parliamentary select committee which looked at the evidence for this, and their conclusion was there's no strong evidence to support the claim that academies produce better results. What there is evidence, the government's biggest claim on academies, is schools which they describe as failing schools, which have Ofsted, the inspectors have been instead of failing, or the new language they use is coasting schools, which are doing okay but not improving rapidly enough. It's not quite clear what the government means by that. But schools that are categorised as that, they want to force under the new education bill to be handed over to the academies. There's just been recent evidence released which looks at what happens to schools which are got poor judgments from the Ofsted school inspectors. So schools which are being labelled inadequate by Ofsted, what happens then in terms of their improvement. And it was out about 10 days ago, you are 6 times more likely, if you're handed over to be an academy, to still be failing at the next inspection than if you're stable.
And I guess they wouldn't be getting necessarily the support the state school would be getting from the local authority, or
not in the same way. They'll do their own thing. So the record is very clear that schools, even schools which are judged and which are not good at the moment, if they want them to improve, you're 6 times more likely to see that school improve if it remains in the local authority and a family of schools like that than if it's handed over to an academy. So that, for me, that's very clear evidence. The final thing I'll say is schools should be accountable to the community. Academies and free schools are not. They're accountable to the people who set them up, and increasingly that's large academy chains run as businesses, and not to the parents, the governors, people who live and work in the area and who send their children there. For me, I'm very proud that in Tower Hamlets at the moment, most of our schools, local people and local residents and parents have a big say in the running of the schools, and that's how it should be.
I also want to get your view. There has been recently a discussion about moving the exam during summer because it falls during the holy month of Ramadan for Muslim community. Don't you think by moving that they are only benefiting one section of the community?
No, not at all. Firstly, the idea that you don't structure the school year around religious holidays is nonsense. Every school in the country is off for Easter and
But
for Christmas.
why should Muslim children be given preferential treatment compared to their counterparts?
Well, the point I was making is you could say the existing school year gives Christian children preferential treatment because they structure the holidays around Christmas and Easter. So some of the accounts have said, religion should have nothing to do with the timing of the school year. Well, that's not a tenable position because it is structured around the Christian year. But actually, it's not true they've moved the exams. Every year, the council, there's a national body which looks at the timing of exams and talks to all the different exam boards. Every year, they look at the timing of those exams and they look at all religions. They look at not one religion, and of course they take into account as far as is possible. They can't always accommodate it, and they were very clear about this. The body which looks at them said, no, we haven't specifically changed them because of Ramadan. We've done what we always do. We look at the timing of exams. We look at all religious communities and can we accommodate any of that? They haven't fundamentally moved the exam.
Would that benefit the youngsters with their exam results, do you think, if they were to be moved?
But they haven't moved them.
There's a discussion.
The report, the exam times were already set long ago.
Okay.
They haven't moved them at all. They simply do what they always do. They did this over a year ago. I've had the exam dates since last August. Those exam dates haven't changed.
Okay.
What they did way back then was they looked at all of the dates coming up and they planned ahead. All they've really done is that in the exams which run from May right through into June, there's a long period of exams. They've put the maths and English ones at the front end of that. They always move from year to year anyway. They're always on different dates. So the major exams, which most students take, are at the front end of that month of exams rather than slightly later. That's all. There's no big change at
And
all. So it's
finally, I wanted to ask, obviously, the government is planning on significant cuts on education.
very, yeah.
From your position in the NUT, National Union of Teachers Association, how do you think that's going to affect the education in general, not just locally, but nationally? How do you think that's going to affect the next generation of the young people?
Well, I think it's very frightening what's threatened at the moment because I said before, not just in Tower Hamlets, but if you look at the report that came out from the Social Market Foundation last week, it shows that in London as a whole, we have one of the best education systems in the world. It's the results in London are better than anywhere else in Britain, and they're comparable with any school system anywhere in the world. And in terms of narrowing the gap between children from affluent backgrounds and children from socially disadvantaged backgrounds, London has the best record of any city anywhere in the world. So it has an education system we should be proud of in Tower Hamlets and London as a whole. And I'm very fearful now that if we allow what's planned to happen in terms of cuts, it will destroy that, and that will be a huge
And
disaster.
is there a campaign? Is there some sort
There's
of
a big
campaign
campaign, because already I mentioned before, Ollie, anyone who's got young children will know this. There's been demography, the population. There's been a population boom in the primary schools already over the last number of years. There's a huge shortage of primary schools places. What that means, for example, now already there's a law that says you can't be educated in a class of more than 30 in the primary schools. The last Labour government did bring that in as one of the things that they did. There are now over 500,000 children already being educated in classes which have got exemptions from that law in primary schools, in classes of over 30. That's a disgrace. They've been allowed to flaunt that law on class size, and that damages education. What's happening now is that the government claims that, we've ring-fenced, protected the funding for schools. Now, technically, that's true. They're giving the same amount of money to schools. What the government hasn't said is that schools are being required by the government to hand over more of that money in national insurance and pensions contributions, and that leaves less money to be spent on pupils and things like that. And that's about a 7 or 8% cut being planned. They're also talking about changing the funding formula. And to cut a long story short, it's a complex argument, and there are problems with the funding formula. It's true that in some of the inner cities in Britain, London, Birmingham, etc., the funding per pupil in education is higher than, for example, in some of the rural areas, Leicestershire, Lincolnshire, Norfolk, and so on, for historical reasons. Of course, that should be changed. The way to change it is to say, look, London education is a success. They should bring the others up to the same level. This government isn't doing that. It wants to change the funding formula, basically to take money away from places like London and Birmingham and move it out to those areas. What that's going to mean in Tower Hamlets, for example, is a threatened total cut when you put all these things together over the next few years of something like 17 or 18%. This will destroy education. You can't take nearly £1 in 5 out of the education system in this borough, which is what this government is threatening to do, without completely devastating. It will mean bigger class sizes, it will mean less teaching assistants, which help the most disadvantaged children. It will push teachers' workload up. There's already a teacher shortage because of the stresses and pressures of workload. More teachers will leave the profession, the quality of education will go down, which is why we as a union are appealing to parents, governors, head teachers, local councillors, MPs to all unite right across London and in this borough to say let's all stand together, saying don't let them wreck London's education, let's improve it, and let's be something that we are proud of it now, we want to continue being proud of in the future.
Thank you, Paul. I think this is one subject that we'll need many more shows to cover, because it's such a wide subject and it's affecting so many people in the community. So thank you very much for coming to the show, and I'm sure our viewers will benefit from some of the response that you have given today.
Well, thank you, Wally.
Dear viewers, you have seen some of the answers given by Paul. I hope that is useful to you and your children, especially education. As I said right at the beginning, education is the backbone of any communities or any society, and it is important that we give our children the best possible start in life. And I hope that you will continue to work hard, making sure that your children get the best education that they deserve. Thank you for watching the Welfare Clinic. Until next time, do stay safe.